Hello, 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 and welcome to our first ever Lunch and Learn, where you can eat lunch and learn at the same time. Super excited to be here and doing this. And we are going to do something extra special today. We're just going to talk about H. pylori and H. pylori cases and look at how you solve this thing. Because it is very straightforward to solve if you know what you're doing. And it is a living nightmare to handle if you don't know what you're doing. And so you should be batting 100% on your H. pylori cases, and it's not an intuitively obvious thing to figure out. So we thought we'd do a special class on it and just make it all about cases and case review, which I think is how practitioners learn the best. Okay, and here's our H. pylori. And we're talking about integrating adrenal stress case tests and GI tests together. And who am I? If you are brand new to this and to me, I am Dan Kalish. I'm the founder of the Kalish Institute. Since 2006, we have trained over 7,000 practitioners. And my goal and role in this lifetime is to basically help functional medicine practices thrive, to get you guys trained in lab interpretation skills and business skills so you can run a profitable clinic that helps a lot of patients. I have worked with the Mayo Clinic. In fact, we had 5 or 6 Mayo Clinic practitioners take my training program at one point. Larry Bergstrom, who's the head of integrative medicine at Mayo in Arizona, actually took the mentorship twice. He's one of the very few people who took the class twice. So I worked a lot with those docs, and we're going to talk about some of the research we did with Mayo in a minute. I right now am working with Dr. Richard Lord, who's one of the really the founders in terms of labs for functional medicine. He's the doctor that, the researcher that first did amino acids and organic acids and fatty acid testing. So I've had the great privilege of being around some of the just most amazing people in the field of functional medicine. I'm very privileged to have had that experience. And, when I think about like, why did Richard Lord spend so many years training me? Why did Dr. Timmons spend 8 years training me? It's because they wanted me to go out and train other practitioners. And so that's the role that I play in our industry now. And we have some classes coming up in June. We have our Learn to Decode the GI testing coming up, GI protocol design. Okay, that's starting June 15th. If you scan that QR code, you get a 20% discount on it and use the code LUNCH24. LUNCH24 is a code. You use that at checkout. So you can scan that. You can sign up for it right now if you want. Get 20% off. And that's going to be our protocol design class in how to work with the microbiome, much more detailed, couple of month course. And part of that class is also reviewing your labs. So we want you sending in your labs so that we can analyze them in the class. Lunch and Learn discount, you get $1,200 off with this QR code. That's a lot. Same code, LUNCH24, scan the QR there. If you want to sign up for our mentorship, which is starting in June, we have a couple of spots available, and I would love it if 2 or 3 of you joined our mentorship. So what is the mentorship? It's a 1-year intensive lab interpretation experience. You learn how to manage cases. You learn how to design programs. You learn how to combine adrenal and GI and female hormone and organic acids testing. It's the flagship class in our industry at this point. So if I think of IFM as like the medical school in our industry that really trains us at that level, and I'm IFM certified. I've been to every IFM module at least 6 or 8 times, probably more. IFM is a medical school. My mentorship is a residency program. This is where doctors really learn how to interpret labs and apply this work in real time. And we were talking about this the other day. I would put any of my mentorship graduates up against any other functional medicine doc that's been in practice for 5 or 10 years. And hands down, my doc's going to have better lab interpretation skills. If you haven't spent a year completely focusing on learning how to interpret labs, then you're not going to be very good at interpreting labs. I mean, I spent 12 years with Richard Lord, 8 years with Dr. Timmons. I've got like 20 years of working with the lab experts in our industry, learning how to interpret labs. It's hard. And if you don't at least take a year out of your life to do it, you are not a good functional medicine practitioner. I'm just going to come out and say it. So take the class. If you don't take my class, find somebody locally who you can spend a year learning with. That's how I did this. I found doctors that would take me on and train me. And I'm trying to offer that same mentorship experience now, but with an online factor to it. Okay. There's not a lot of people doing this specific kind of thing. Go to IFM to get the medical school stuff, come to me to get the residency part, and you get 1,200 bucks off. Okay. If you really want to devote a year of your life to learning how to do that stuff. And then we work with Rupa Health quite a bit. You get $100 off your first lab order with Rupa if you scan that code. And Rupa is a great distribution service for lab companies. Love Rupa, and pretty much everybody uses Rupa. If you're not using Rupa yet, go ahead, grab that code and get yourself, signed up with Rupa so you can start to work with them. All right, so I'm going to show you first of all this. So woohoo! Look at all those. There we go, right there. Let's try that one. So here, this is the Mayo Clinic study that we did. So it was Sue Cutshall. She's at Mayo in Rochester. Took my mentorship. Larry Bergstrom, Mayo in Arizona, took my class, and we got together with a couple other docs at Mayo Clinic and decided, hey, let's do a study. Let's evaluate a functional medicine approach to treating fatigue, stress, and digestive issues in women. We took 25 women in high stress positions. Most of them were working in Silicon Valley in, executive suite kind of jobs. We were originally going to do 25 nurses at Mayo Clinic, and that kind of fell through. So I was like, where can we find out 25 women who are guaranteed to be stressed out? And I thought, hey, I know where. How about Silicon Valley executives? They're all stressed out because they all work 100 hours a week, just like the nurses do. So we picked out these women. We started to study. This was a whole year of my life to do this, but we don't have time to really get into the details on this. Other than that, what we did was we took adrenal and GI labs on all these women, and you'll see here in the quote here, right here, these treatments reduced H. pylori infection. So 9 of the women had H. pylori at the beginning of the study. When we did the 6-month follow-up testing, we got rid of H. pylori in 8 out of the 9 with the exact protocols I'm about to show you. You can read the study. You can probably just Google it and find it, or we can send out copies or whatever. But there's some detail here. You probably sit down and read it in 20 minutes. I'm just kind of cutting to the back here. So these exact protocols that are in the study are the ones that I teach in my mentorship class, this stuff right here. This was basically Mayo saying, hey, let's look at your mentorship class. Does that stuff really work? I'm like, I think it works. I don't know. So we did a study, and yeah, this works really well. These are the exact protocols that we're going to talk about today, same ones I teach in the mentorship, and none of this stuff has changed. It's really identical, okay? So anyways, that's something you can take a look at later. And for now, let's take another look here at the actual, where'd it go here? Sorry, I pulled it up. Now I can't find it. Here it is. All right, here's a synopsis of a bunch of these cases. So I thought, hey, what the heck? We can use, for the Lunch and Learn, we can use some of these Mayo cases, and then I've got some fresh ones that we can look at too. Okay, we'll do both. So here's basically the way the document is structured is there's a little bit of a history on the patient. There's a little bit on their top 3 complaints, and then here's the adrenal lab, and here's the GI lab. So given that we're talking about H. pylori, let's find ones that have H. pylori. Let's see. Although it really honestly doesn't matter that much. Oh yeah, here's a good one. Okay, so we'll use 105. Obviously they were all, anonymized or whatever, so we don't have like Sue Smith on here. It's like patient number 105. So 38-year-old single woman, filmmaker and owner. Not all of them were Silicon Valley people. Top 3 complaints: fatigue that's severe, night sweats, shaking, sometimes stays in bed all day, has no energy, reports being hypoglycemic, has been gluten and dairy free for 9 months. As a kid, had IBS, used to be a health professional before she became a movie producer, now travels around the world and owns her own company. So high stress, high profile female. In May, could barely get out of bed and kept getting sick. After starting the program, was getting out of bed with energy and wanted to go work out. Got an STD, yeast infection, vaginitis, and 2 UTIs during the study, where she was taking 4 rounds of antibiotics and had to stop had to stop the H. pylori herbs early. Okay. But overall improved. And we've got all the details on these cases too. So there's her adrenal lab, which we're just kind of not going to focus on today. But here's the GI test, right? So H. pylori in the beginning, no H. pylori towards the end there. Let's just find, here's another H. pylori case. That one was disqualified. Let's just find one more here. Here we go. And you'll see after a while, this is all sort of, it's almost like one person. There's this, it's the same exact kinds of symptoms that show up in almost all these people. So this one, carried extra weight, high emotional stress after her mother died and son in prison, caring for her 11-year-old. Follow-up, what started happening during the treatment? Started sleeping through the night, hadn't slept well in 20 years. And has started having more than one bowel movement in a day. In the past, hadn't been so regular. Got off of gluten. Brain is better. Loose bowel movements and GI complaints on the GI supplements. Went off her program. Blah blah. So basically, you see these patterns that'll show up in almost all these cases. And let me just show you how you can start to deal with this. And it's not too important which company you use. I'll show you some other examples though, just so you can see. I've got a couple from an earlier class here. So here's one here. So here on this particular test, this is a GI map, okay? They have the H. pylori markers really clearly in this section of the test here. You can see the whole big H. pylori section. So if you see this positive on the lab, it'll be in red. If you see the virulence factors, they'll also be in red. So that's easy to spot on that kind of a format of a test. And I've got another few here. Oops, sorry. That I pulled up. Let me find it. Sorry, I got a lot of labs here for you guys. Oh, here, while we're at it, let's look at this one. So here's another adrenal panel. Okay, and again, the specifics don't matter so much in terms of the patient's symptoms because we're going to be doing the same basic treatment regardless. So here's a typical adrenal case that would have H. pylori or gut problems in general. So the cortisol awakening response is quite poor. It should be 50 or better, plus or minus 10 points. It's at 14, so the cortisol awakening response is weak. The DHEA should be around 100 or 200 at least. 300 is optimum. It's at 73. And then you can see here the cortisol is low, then up, then down a bit, then sky high. So when you see these sky high cortisols at night, that person's ruminating and worrying and thinking too much. And when you're this stressed, and you have H. pylori, the H. pylori is going to flare up and cause problems. So one of the central concepts that Timmons taught me was that you want to get the adrenals under control, get the stress response under control before you do your H. pylori clearing. That will double the odds of it working. If you try to treat H. pylori in a patient like this with super high cortisol and super low cortisol and just completely in the car out of balance, a low DHEA, if you try to treat H. pylori in a patient like this on day one, the odds on it working are very slim. If you get the person stronger, okay, and you prepare the adrenals, you are strengthening the immune system by doing that, which is your friend in this fight against the H. pylori. So when people are stressed out of their minds, as this lab shows, you're going to be degrading or breaking down the gut lining as part of being catabolic. That's what adrenal exhaustion, adrenal fatigue is. You're catabolic. You're breaking things down, including muscle tissue and gut lining. So right away, you've got leaky gut if you've got a lab like this with the adrenals. And then the other thing that happens is that cortisol regulates secretory IgA. Cortisol regulates secretory IgA. So if your adrenals are in this bad a shape, your SIG-A is going to be screwed up. And that's the immune response in the gut. So if you have leaky gut and crappy SIG-A, it's very difficult to get control over GI infections. If you treat the adrenals first for a couple of months and you get better SIG-A output, a better immune response in the gut, and you reduce the damage to the gut lining and reduce the leaky gut, it's going to be much easier to kill GI infections. And so this is a Genova adrenal stress profile, okay? Super, super important to do that. And I just want to, oh, here's another one. Here's a, and by the way, can I just say, if you were in the mentorship, you would have seen all these labs this morning. I just pulled up labs that I was looking at this morning in the mentorship. We just went through like 6 or 8 cases in the past hour. But in the mentorship class, which is 1 year long, we have like 4 hours a week of lab review, 4 hours a week of lab review, 4 hours a week of lab review. At the end of the year, you've seen hundreds and hundreds of cases. And guess what? That volume of interpreting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases gets you really good at it. Okay. Even in one day, even in this like 1 week in the mentorship, we've got, let's say, 25 cases that you're going to learn from, you know. So here's another one. This is a GI effects from Genova that was submitted today in the mentorship class. And look at this. This is classic. This person has an infection and inflammation that's all gut related. Okay, so where are we going to start? With the adrenals, because we want to make sure that that system is working really well. Here's a Dutch test that was again submitted today. So this is, many of you are familiar with this, another way of looking at the adrenals. Okay, and here you can see that cortisols are running really low, and the DHEA is at a 77. And again, you want that around a 300, 375. So this person has low cortisol, low DHEA. That's going to make them really susceptible to GI problems. Now here's my favorite one from today. So this is a GI map that was submitted today. And look at this. Look at this section here. This is the commensal bacterial section of the GI map. Every single marker is low. Every single marker is low. This is a microbiome that is at, have you ever seen the Mad Max movies? I love Mel Gibson, or I loved him back in the day before he became like a wackadoodle. But when he was a young man, he was a great actor. And that dystopian world, like it's like the Mad Max of your gut. This is like the worst possible scenario. This is like some futuristic world where the gut bacteria are just gone. This is horrible. This is the worst thing that can happen. So when you have, because this question comes up a lot in relation to H. pylori clinically, when do I treat H. pylori? Well, you can have H. pylori with a perfectly healthy microbiome. In that case, you may not need to treat it. You know, but those patients, those are not people that are going to come in to your clinic because they feel great and they're really healthy. If you have a microbiome like this and H. pylori at the same time, you're going to be having some serious reasons to treat the H. pylori. So treating H. pylori is critical the more damaged the microbiome has become. Does that make sense? Treating H. pylori becomes more and more important the more damaged that that person's gut bacteria have become. Because the normal way that we balance all this out is we have H. pylori and a super healthy microbiome, that equals super healthy patient. But H. pylori microbiome like this equals super sick patient, okay? Big difference. And I'm gonna go through a couple of these cases. I wanna write up one protocol for you guys, and then we can do questions after that. Let's see. This is one of the worst ones I've ever seen, and it's just stunning. So, and okay, I'm going to ask you guys a quiz question right now. This is a pop quiz, okay? Pop quiz, you ready? Everyone's had a pop quiz at some point in their life. Okay, get your pen out, but in this case, you're just going to type in your answer. So the quiz question today is, what do you think the symptoms of this patient were? What do you think the symptoms of this patient were? And I'll tell you another little interesting factoid while you're typing away there, which is that, type into the chat thing. This patient eats no vegetables, or fruit. 0. This person only eats meat and carbs. No fruit, no vegetables in her diet at all. Not a bite. I'm keep saying this because I thought it was so cool. Not a bite of fruit or a bite of vegetables ever. Meat and grains only in the diet. Isn't that incredible? So you have a diet like that, this is what happens. Okay, so now I tricked you by asking that question. The trick was that this patient in the mentorship class that we just did an hour ago, that you could be in if you sign up for mentorship, you could have been in this class, okay? This patient had no digestive symptoms at all. 0, none, 0, none, 0, none, none, 0, none, 0. Not what we call digestive symptoms. So what do we call digestive symptoms? Constipation, gas, bloating, indigestion, heartburn, reflux disease, stuff like that. What do I call digestive symptoms? Number 1 digestive symptom in my mind is fatigue. Number 2 is depression with anxiety, depression and anxiety. Number 3, female hormone imbalances. Number 4, some kind of neurological or brain-related problem. Number 5, autoimmunity. So autoimmunity, depression, fatigue, anxiety, all of those are digestive tract symptoms, because when the microbiome collapses like that, your metabolic health falls apart. Your neurological health falls apart. All of these systems fall apart. You have to become toxic. Why? Because you're not getting rid of waste effectively. Your immune system is completely damaged by a lack of these commensal bacteria. So we want to rethink what a digestive symptom is. Again, a digestive symptom with a poor microbiome: fatigue, depression, anxiety, cognitive problems, female hormone or male hormone issues, metabolic issues that lead to obesity and weight gain, food cravings, sugar cravings. All of those are symptoms of a screwed up microbiome. So the net of all this is that every single patient has to have a GI test, because you're going to have patients that had, my favorite one of these is, we had a doctor in this class, in my mentorship class, which you're all going to sign up for. We had a doctor, his name was Neil. This is a long time ago. This is like almost 20 years ago. I totally remember Neil though. I really liked him. He was a cool guy. Because really physically fit. Anyways, Neil is a cool guy. So Neil was a doctor. He's in the mentorship. He's a doctor. He's a male, and he was having these recurrent bladder infections. And we're all just like, I don't know. Why is that happening? I don't know. So he did the testing. He had H. pylori. This one really blew my mind. He treated the H. pylori. He's a doctor. He treated it, yeah? And his bladder infections went away. And we're all just looking at each other going, okay, I don't know. Is that even related? And the H. pylori, during the year-long class, the H. pylori actually came back, and the bladder infections came back. And he treated them again, and then they went away again. So during the year-long class with Neil, we actually had the opportunity to watch him have bladder infections, treat the H. pylori, they completely went away. Have the H. pylori come back on the test, the bladder infections came back, he treated them again, they went away again. That's pretty cool. So you never know what H. pylori is going to cause. That was one of the stranger ones. I had a patient named Ed who used to fly around in his private jet to see me. He was a very wealthy individual. He was referred in because he had excruciating neck pain that was radiating down into his arm. And there was a personal trainer that referred him in. And Ed was like 2 or 3 weeks away from doing exploratory neck surgery, because they had done every scan and every exam and every kind of test, and they just couldn't figure out how these nerve roots were getting so irritated and damaged. He was incapacitated. And so Ed came in. I'm like, the only reason why I tested Ed was because he was referred by this personal trainer who sent me a lot of business. And I didn't want to just say, I don't have no idea what to do, because this is like, something that's obviously a nerve root problem, and it's way beyond my ability to understand how to fix you here, Ed. But instead, I just said, okay, let's just do the basic testing. Ed had H. pylori. I'm not making this up. This is like blazed in my mind. It's a true story. Ed had H. pylori. It was the only time in my practice where I actually had like an emergency situation that had to be dealt with over a weekend. I called Ed. I said, we just got your labs back. You have H. pylori. He went in to see his doctor. His stomach was bleeding, and he had really severe version of H. pylori, and had to, have a pretty urgent treatment for that, like immediately, same day kind of problem. It turned out that his nerve root in the neck was being irritated from his stomach. And if you look at the pathways, it actually kind of makes sense about how there's viscerosomatic and somatic visceral feedback loops. So all of that neck pain completely cleared up the day he started taking the antibiotics for H. pylori. That was probably between Neil and Ed, I mean, you just never know what H. pylori is going to cause. And I have had hundreds of these cases. In children, I've had many, many cases where the kid's waking up every morning and throwing up. And if it's a girl that's doing that, they tend to be labeled as having an eating disorder, anorexic, bulimic, whatever you want to call it. If it's a boy, maybe the diagnosis is not pushed so hard. I've had at least a dozen kids in these last 30 years waking up in the morning, my stomach hurts, I'm throwing up, H. pylori. End of story, treat it. They're better a month later and just moving on with their lives. So H. pylori can manifest in so many different ways. You really have to be on guard about that, okay? All right, so let me design a program, and then I'm gonna go through questions, and then we're gonna wrap it up, because I know it's the middle of the day and we don't wanna drag this on too long, drag this out too long. All right, I'm gonna pull up a sheet here. Where to go? So much to think about. These are all the labs just from one class. That's a pretty cool one, female hormones, but we're not talking about that right now. Okay, here. For some reason I can't pull it up. Let's see, my computer's freaking out. Hang on a second. There we go. So if you do find H. pylori, and again, I'm trying to show you examples of different lab companies. You can use a GI 360, you can use a GI effects, you can use a GI map. It doesn't really matter. They all screen for H. pylori. And then once you get that back and you have a problem, then you're going to think, oh, wait a minute. Dan said that I should do the adrenal test. So you can run an adrenal panel, whether it's a Dutch test or an adrenal stress profile or wherever you're getting whatever you prefer there. And then you're going to start them in on an adrenal program. And let me show you how that's going to work. And we can use the one that I just showed you here as an example. What the heck? Where'd it go? Let's use the Dutch here. So this one had, remember, low DHEA. It should be around 300, and it's at 70. And it had the low cortisol, okay? That was just a quick reminder. All right, so we're going to do an adrenal program for 6 months, starting now. And then in 2 months, start H. pylori program below. And then in 6 months, we test adrenals and GI testing. And again, GI map, GI 360, GI effects, they all cover H. pylori. Some of them you have to check a box to cover the H. pylori. You want to do it. Most of the conventional medical testing, this is for Marie who just asked a question, most of the conventional medical testing, like a breath test or an endoscopic exam, is really designed for acute H. pylori infections. And the blood testing for H. pylori, as you all know, is kind of problematic because you can have false results, right? You can see the antibodies high, but they don't have the infection or whatever. But so for the blood and the breath test and the endoscopic exam, There was a period of maybe 5 or 6 years in my practice when PCR testing for H. pylori first came out, and I started to run them on every patient. But I was still running all the other old tests, because that's what we did originally. And you will find H. pylori on a GI map, GI effects, GI 360 frequently that is missed with a breath test or an endoscopic exam or a blood test. Frequently. In fact, the PCR was so much more accurate that I just stopped doing the other kinds of testing, and now I just do PCR. So if the person has done a breath test and there was no H. pylori, test for H. pylori. If the person has done endoscopic exam, which you think would be accurate, when they miss the H. pylori, test for H. pylori. And you'll see this on a regular basis. You will be the first person that found it because you're using PCR. And why is PCR better? Have you ever watched a television show, preferably British, that involves a murder mystery? We all have. Hopefully you've even watched a whole series of British murder mysteries. And one of the things that's classic in a detective show is the detective walks in the room where the murder victim is there, and then there's a forensic team that's right behind the detective. And the forensic team is taking DNA samples from the blood and the hair, and that person picked up this hatchet, and I'm going to grab the DNA off there, right? So DNA testing is PCR testing. So it's incredibly accurate. The old way of doing these kinds of tests is you actually, like, think about an endoscopic exam. They have to physically see something. That's really hard to pull off. Finding the DNA of something like H. pylori, super easy. And we all know that PCR or DNA testing is incredibly accurate. If your DNA is at the crime scene, we know that you were there. There's no ambiguity. If you see a PCR test positive for H. pylori, there is no ambiguity. So it's not only easier to find H. pylori on PCR, but the ambiguity that's in there, mixed in there with the blood testing, is completely taken away. So it's the way to go. And PCR has been for H. pylori has been around for a long time. It's longer than I can remember. I remember, like, in my career, when I was doing the old testing and the new testing, that was like before my son was born. This is like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. This stuff has been around for a long time. It's not a new technology anymore. If you're not using PCR for H. pylori, talk about you're living in the 80s if you're doing that. And I'm not against the 80s. I'm glad I got through the 80s, but like, who would want to live in the 80s anymore? No, we're not going to do that. Okay, so DHEA drops. I use Biomatrix. That was Dr. Timmons' company. He was one of the best doctors in the history of functional medicine. So buy his stuff. It supports his son and his son's family. And I think the son has 2 daughters. So anyways, it's a good thing. Buy Biomatrix products and supporting a wonderful family. And they don't have, there's not a lot of companies that have these drops anyways. So I would do something like this, and then some kind of a multi-pack. And that's usually twice a day. Sometimes they're once a day, depending on which pack you use. You always want to use some blood sugar support for the adrenals. So I usually use lipoic acid and then berberine. Could use one or the other or both, but some kind of blood sugar support. Every company has something that's good for your blood sugar, right? And then you want to use some extra vitamin C with flavonoids. Those usually come in 500 milligram capsules, so you want to use a couple of those. And then I usually toss in something that's kind of adaptogenic herbs. I use adrenatone a lot from Designs for Health. That one works really well. Okay, so that gets the person started on the adrenal part of the program. You run that for the first couple of months, and then you're going to do a 2-month anti-H. pylori program. 2-month H. pylori. Now you could, and I think sometimes this is the better option, use medications for H. pylori. You could use a Prep pack. Totally support that if it's appropriate. And there are many cases where you want to use medications instead of herbs. I'm just going to show you the herbal program. But yeah, again, many times when you may want to use medications instead of herbs. I use Mastica gum from Allergy Research Group. It's in a 500 milligram capsule. If you're new to this and you're just starting out, just keep the dosage moderate, like 1-3 times a day. When you get to be super experienced, you can use a larger amount of Mastica. And then you want some kind of anti-inflammatory. The easiest one is some kind of DGL or deglycerated licorice root. Every company will have that. 2 months of this, and you can knock out the H. pylori in 8 out of the 9 cases. When you get to be more advanced, you can bring the dosages up, but that's a great place to start. Okay, and then for those of you that joined us late, Rupa, we work with as a partner. You get $100 off your first Rupa lab order if you scan that code. Scan that QR code there. You'll go right into Rupa if you're a new client of theirs. If you're interested in the mentorship, we're starting one next month, and set up a call with one of my staff. Check out the different information about it. If you really want to learn how to interpret labs, that is the place to be. And if you're not ready for the mentorship and you want to do a lightweight class, you just learn how to do the microbiome GI interpretation stuff, then you can do this course. It's a boot camp. We still review live in-person labs in this class. So if you have lab testing you want to submit, you can join this class and I'll teach you how to interpret all these tests. Okay. And you get a discount code off that. You get a discount code off the mentorship. All right, so now I'm going to poke around and we have a few minutes here still left. I'm going to go for questions. In no particular order, I'm just going to look for questions that I think I can answer. And if I don't answer your question, it's either because I don't know the answer to it or because I just ran out of time. Oh yeah, so this is a great question, Dr. Ging. Does berberine serve as a broad spectrum antimicrobial for H. pylori and other bugs? Yeah, so it does. So berberine is good for your liver. It's really good for your blood sugar, really good for your blood sugar, and extremely good for your gut. So berberine's kind of got a lot of roles to play, you know? Um, with depleted bacteria, this is from Kimberly, with depleted bacteria in H. pylori, would you still delay treatment and to treat the adrenals first? Yes. So the more damaged the gut is, the more important it is to focus on the adrenals first. Why? There's a couple of things in there. So one is because cortisol regulates SIG-A. So as you work on the adrenals, you're improving the immune response. So you're more likely to kill this thing. And B, because when cortisol is really wonky, you're in a catabolic state, meaning you're breaking down your gut lining. So how easy is it to fix H. pylori when you're stressed out of your mind? Not that easy. But there's an even bigger reason why the adrenals go first, because the adrenals are code word for lifestyle, diet, exercise, sleep, and spiritual practices. So when I say adrenals, and we're starting there, I mean not just the adrenal supplements, but diet, exercise, sleep, and spiritual practices. So a month or two of diet, exercise, sleep, and spiritual practices is going to be strengthening that person. So when you go after the H. pylori, you're more likely to get it. Okay. Um, so cranberry and cumin seed to help with removing H. pylori, absolutely yes. Those are both good ideas. If you have enough room in the supplement program to add more products, then do it because it'll be more likely to work. Glutamine is a great way to clean up the the repair of the gut lining and reverse a lot of the gut lining damage. And slippery elm is incredibly effective also. So that's in a lot of the formulas that I've used for H. pylori repair. So most of the companies that we work with will have a sort of a DGL, slippery elm kind of combo, different, combo product that you can use that would be anti-inflammatory. The key is when you're doing the H. pylori programs to use the Mastica plus something that has an anti-inflammatory effect. That really makes a big difference, okay? Let's see, hang on a second. I'm trying to go back in time on the questions here. Yeah, and people with H. pylori end up with a lot of bad problems. One of the most important things that happens with H. pylori is it damages your body's ability to absorb protein. Even if you're eating protein, you're not going to absorb it as much as you should. And when your amino acid levels start to drop, it's just a living disaster. So for H. pylori values that are present but not high, that is case dependent. So in some of those cases, you're probably going to want to treat it, especially if the microbiome is really screwed up. So if you see an H. pylori present but it's not high, run down and look at the microbiome portion of the test and see what's happening there, and that can help you make your assessment if you want to treat it or not. Let's see, explain more about healthy microbiome plus H. pylori equals healthy patient. So half of the world has H. pylori. Just because you have H. pylori doesn't mean it's causing a problem. What's supposed to happen in human life is that we pick up and are exposed to a variety of parasites and H. pylori, bacteria, whatever. We have all these different infections in our gut. And our healthy microbiome, our good gut bacteria, just deal with it. So you can walk through life with an infection like H. pylori and have it never cause any kind of a problem because your gut microbiome is in perfect shape. Those are not people that I ever treat. Those people do not come into my clinic. They are not going to come into your clinic because they feel great, okay? They don't have any problems. They're not tired. They're not depressed. They're not having headaches. They're not having, metabolic problems. They're healthy people. So you can have, if you're super healthy and super fit and your microbiome's in beautiful shape, you can have H. pylori and it makes no difference. In fact, some people think that H. pylori can even be, not only a commensal and be kind of neutral, but even be protective in some ways. It's the people that are stressed out of their minds that are having the problems with H. pylori. So H. pylori problems are contextual. Okay. Let's see. By the way, I'm looking at the answers here. There's some good answers. Thank you guys for doing that. Eric, Ann, John had some good answers to that question. A couple of you guys nailed it. We talked about that one. So now this is a really good question. This is a FIFA. So can PCR show H. pylori even when it's not causing any trouble? Yes, the answer to that is yes. So do you always treat H. pylori? No. They have to have some kind of symptoms that you're trying to, if they're perfectly healthy and they feel great and amazing every day, if they have a great sex drive, their mood is beautiful, they're physically fit and exercising every day, they eat super clean food, they have loving relationships, they have a spiritual practice, which is taking them to different dimensions every day, they've just got everything going on for them, then absolutely you don't have to treat H. pylori, okay? Because it's not causing a problem. Let's see, we have a couple more minutes. H. pylori GI map that are not flagged in red but appear high. So I'm mentioning that again. So if you're on the GI map and you see that it's present but it's not high, if the patient has symptoms that are significant, then you should treat it. But what are the symptoms that we're talking about? Fatigue, depression, urinary tract infections, neck pain, right? It's not just digestive symptoms. If the person is not healthy and they have the H. pylori show up, I think it's worth treating it. And the reason why I say that is because I've done that so many thousands of times, and it almost always leads to an improvement in their overall health. Would you add HCl to increase stomach acid? Be careful using HCl with H. pylori cases because by definition, their stomach is damaged and they can cause a lot of burning. So usually with H. pylori, if you want to give them some digestive support, which is a good idea, you can use more of a digestive enzyme or maybe some gallbladder support and stay away from the HCl in the short term. Once you think the H. pylori is gone, you could add it in, but you run the risk of them reacting poorly to the HCl in H. pylori cases. Let's see, probiotics. Yeah, so probiotics are going to be used either in the beginning, middle, or end of treatment. So you could use probiotics as soon as you've got the testing done and you want to get the person's gut working better. You could use probiotics during the time when you're killing the gut bacteria. And you could use probiotics after that time. So it's just a decision to make, mostly based on how many supplements a person can deal with taking all at one time. That's what you have to be careful of. let's see, a couple more questions. Where are we at time-wise? All right, we got another minute or so here. Do you ever fear H. pylori will activate in a further stress state? Yeah, if that's happening, you can always eliminate it. The thing about mastica um, is that, I mean, you would not want to use the antibiotics for H. pylori unless you really have a severe, a strong argument why you have to do that, because the antibiotics have a big downside. But if you're doing the natural treatment with mastica, even in a case that's not severe, there's no big downside to mastica. It's a stomach tonic. It's been used since the time of the Greeks, the chios tree in Greece or whatever they get their mastica from. It's not a new plant to the human body, and it's been used for a couple thousand years. It's just as an overall good thing for your stomach. So I think a couple months of of mastica is not going to harm anybody in any way, at least that I've ever seen. We haven't really seen that last few thousand years, so I think you're pretty much okay. Just be careful with the dosing, because the higher dosages can cause some problems. And if you're new to this, keep the dosing relatively low, maybe one capsule 2 or 3 times a day, okay? Um, yeah, and absolutely. So you want to do, question is, do I do the GI testing in recurrent UTIs? You have to. Any symptom that's related to the immune system, recurrent chest colds, recurrent UTIs, recurrent anything, you have to do the gut testing because it's going to be a way you're going to solve that. Okay. All right. I'm going to wrap it up for now. We're at time, but thank you guys so much for coming to our Lunch and Learn. We'll be having a few more of these coming up soon, and I hope to see you at one of those. All right, bye for now.